I really do technology trouble. Just not very good with laptops. Anyway, my name's Mike Drzal. I head up the venture capital practice at LeClair Ryan. And just a little bit about the firm. We started off as a venture capital boutique in 1988 in Richmond, Virginia, above the sushi bar, of all places. And here we are in 2011 with offices in 8 states, the District of Columbia, and 350 attorneys, and it was absolutely a failed business model because we really did start off wanting to be a venture capital boutique, and therein is a little bit of a lesson for entrepreneurship, which is what you start off starting to do often isn't the way your business will ultimately develop, but we'll get to more of that. I think what you're going to pick up on very quickly into this presentation is that as a venture capital attorney, I approach the practice of law very differently. And Mike and I were talking about this as we drove over from Rochester today. You have to be very willing to step over into the business side of starting a company, and the legal considerations are important to the extent that you get things right from the beginning, but there are, quite frankly, some things that are even more important as you're starting off. So some of this won't look like law because it isn't, but quite frankly, at a certain point in the development of a company, it's more important than the law, because if you can't answer some of these questions in the affirmative, you don't get to the law because you really decide that entrepreneurship, starting a company, isn't for you, which is a legitimate decision and a good decision and a fine decision as long as you make it early enough that you haven't disrupted your life and raised money and complicated a number of other people's lives starting something that you really get into and then decide you don't have the heart for, patience for, the determination for. So here's some of the things that I talk with, and we work with a variety of entrepreneurs. Some of them are faculty entrepreneurs who come up with something really great that has a lot of commercial potential and decide that they are going to start or want to start a company. Others are, and we've talked about this a little bit, we've got a new generation of entrepreneurs that actually goes out into universities and shops for intellectual property. And we even have a company that started in Northern Virginia called Innovate Tech that's in the business of matchmaking and helping people shop for intellectual property. So instead of the entrepreneur trying to figure out on their own what they're going to do, commercialize or whatever, they'll go shopping at a variety of universities. If they find intellectual property that they feel that they can spin a company up into, they'll approach the university, sometimes directly, sometimes through us, and we'll get a license agreement in place, and off we go. So some of these are more directed, obviously, at not the serial entrepreneur, somebody who's started and exited 3, 4, 5 companies, but more first-timer or faculty entrepreneur. So, why would you even want to start a company? Well, some people like the challenge of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the corridor theory, which I really ascribe to, which is you start toward a goal, walking down the corridor, and you really don't know how your plans are going to be impacted or how you're going to get there, but you have enough self-confidence and trust in your vision and the people around you that you just march down the corridor. And part of being an entrepreneur is really having an extraordinary tolerance for ambiguity, because you are figuring it out on the fly as you head down the corridor. Commercializing inventions. There's just some science that's so good that it really needs to be introduced to the world, because it's going to not only be very profitable and lucrative for the people who are involved in it, but it's good science. It's going to cure a disease. It's going to create cheaper energy. It's going to result in a cleaner environment. It's going to have a very good effect on society at some level, and it really does need to be moved from the academic institution into the commercial world. Universities tend to like commercialization. A lot of times it results in sponsored research at the university. Or every university that I know of, one of the relevant metrics is how much sponsored research do you have. And the more sponsored research you have at your university, by that metric, obviously you're doing well and you're doing the right thing. And I would say at the end of the day, you have to plan on, and it really needs to start off this way, is that it's a partnership between academic research and business. It can't be an adversarial relationship. We talked about this a little bit over lunch. The same way that the entrepreneur has to plan on things maybe not unfolding exactly according to the way the business plan has set them out, the University Tech Transfer Office has to be prepared occasionally for some surprises along the way, and there's a certain amount of trust and flexibility that has to be inherent on both sides, or the relationship is not going to work. So again, these are more comments more directed at people in academia or the first timer, or in some cases we see this, and this was a topic of a dinner discussion last night, somebody who is moving from big corporate America, big pharma, big defense, big whatever, and they've decided to be an entrepreneur. And really, what we see a lot of is some pretty serious culture shock to move in to a very unstructured and ambiguous environment where you're going to be chief cook and bottle washer, you're going to be taking out the trash, you're going to be interfacing with your research staff, you're going to be doing everything that needs to be done to keep the thing functioning. For people who are moving out of very structured environments like academia or a big corporation where they're very used to having people with very defined roles, it can be a real shock to people. And in my experience I've run into, I can count on both of my hands the number of faculty folks who have successfully made the transition from being in academia, being very active teaching at the university or whatever, to the entrepreneurial world. I will also say that I've seen the most successful of those people ultimately leave academia because the enterprise ultimately consumes them, their being, and you just make the move. And it's not a good thing, a bad thing, or an indifferent thing, it just is. So you really need different skills, different approaches, and this is a point that I just can't drive home enough, and it's a place that I see a lot of first-time entrepreneurs or faculty people who are trying to make the transition and start a company. They've got just phenomenal technology. They're in love with the technology. This is great technology, and if I build it, they will come. Well, guess what? They probably won't. The U.S. in particular is very market-driven. The best technology doesn't always win. I'll use the classic example very close to home here of IBM and Amdahl back in the 60s. So IBM had, maybe C+ technology, but they had a great service organization, and if it broke, the executive who was responsible for IT at the time, I don't think they had CIOs back in the steam-driven days, you could pick up the phone, and lo and behold, somebody from IBM would come out, fix it, and so-and-so wasn't going to lose his or her job because they recommended IBM being the IT solution. Amdahl, on the other hand, was A+ or A++ technology, but they didn't have the service backup. They had a different orientation for the company. And here we are, how many years later, and you look at the two companies and their relative position in the marketplace, and that tells the whole story. Amdahl is, I'm not even sure it's still around these days, but last time I checked, IBM was doing okay. Probably not still with the A+ technology, but still emphasizing what the market wants, which is reliability, dependability, safe choice. Am I going to lose my job if this goes down? Or am I going to be able to say this was the best solution and it was the safe choice, and of course they're going to fix it and it's going to be fine. So one of the things that I emphasize to entrepreneurs all the time is, just because it is the greatest technology that you've ever seen in this vertical, do not assume for a minute that you're going to be successful introducing it into the marketplace. That is a fundamentally wrong assumption. And assessing the market potential for it and coming up with a go-to-market plan is absolutely critical to being ultimately successful. So flexibility, adaptability, already talked about that. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about this, but because Mike is going to really expand on this, but one of the quick checkoff items that's on my list after we get past the culture shock and the ambiguity and do you really want to do this, and one of the things that I always tell people at that point is, just think about it this way: you can always get more money, but you can't get more time. If you invest 3 years of your life in a failed endeavor, you're not going to get that time back. You may ultimately take what you learned and go to your next endeavor and be very, very successful, but are you prepared to invest those years of your life trying to move an enterprise forward and not having it ultimately be successful? Yes, no, and if the answer is yes, proceed forward. If not, fine. Okay, so back to this. The intellectual property, will it support a business? Really, a key consideration is it clean intellectual property? What we see a lot of times is people have friends or consultants or people around the business who are doing things, contributing to software code, helping with some research or doing something. And if at the very early stages of a company you haven't entered into some pretty basic but very important agreements like confidentiality and invention assignment agreements, now you've got key pieces of IP that are kind of adrift, and while the core IP might be wonderful and something you could build a business on, some key enhancements or maybe something that makes the whole thing work as a business proposition is not owned by the company. It's not in the company. So when I say, is it clean, that's what I'm talking about. Is it sufficient? And Mike will talk about this more. If you take all of the IP that you've got, and let's just assume you've got a good fence around it, you've done all the right things with the invention assignments agreement and the confidentiality and so forth, is it enough for you to launch a business without being hit the day after you bring your website up with a cease and desist letter saying that you're infringing on somebody else's intellectual property? And that's in the freedom to operate realm that Mike will talk about a lot more. So is it clean? Is it sufficient? From where I come from, and because of what I do, which is helping companies at every stage raise capital, can you raise money against it? Is this intellectual property that if you put it in front of a venture capital firm or an angel investor at the due diligence stage of them deciding whether or not to invest in your company, is it going to be something that passes that checkoff list item on the due diligence list, or is there some flaw, some insufficiency in the intellectual property such that it's going to not pass that hurdle? So that's something that's very key, and again, Mike will talk about that a lot more. Another thing to think about, and again, trust me, we will get to some legal stuff here in a little bit, but these things are very, very important as threshold issues. Do you have something that you can really create a company around? So what do I mean about that? Well, if you've got something that enhances HD TV and you've got a patent on it,